I remember when Mom would tell me that the ship was coming into port, coming home, coming to Charleston, USS Dewey. I had so much anxiety about it. My stomach would be all tied up in knots. Felt like it was being torn apart. It felt like my head was freezing on the inside. My heart felt like it had turned into a very sharp icicle, and it was poking at all my other organs, causing pain. Each time, they would drag me off to the woods. I would get so stressed. That I would go out of my body. I'd stay close to myself until I got to the spot. They'd always pick some clearing somewhere where there were trees all the way around. Some place where the grass had already been flattened. Most of them would do things like jack off in my face, or play with themselves while looking at me, while touching me. I remember watching them from way up in the sky. The ones I remember the most clearly were the ones who would lay on top of me. And some of them were so big, they couldn't get it in, so they just put it between my legs. I never had the physical virginity because of everything they did to me. I was 6 years old when this started. It lasted for 4 years. With the exception of one person who did it even after then. I remember the first time it happened, I tried to tell Mom. I tried to get her away from everybody and talk to her, because I just had this thing in my head that if I tried to tell her where everybody else was around, it would get twisted somehow. And you know what? When I thought we were alone in a quiet place, here comes DJ trotting up behind. And before he had even heard anything I'd said, he said, "You're a liar." And then he looked at my mother and told her, "She's lying. She's just trying to get between me and my friends. She's trying to break us up." And I thought, a 6-year-old in the 70s thinks of things like this? Sits at home conniving how to break up her mother and her stepfather? It's crazy. I got walloped until I agreed to say that I was lying. But I had decided at that point there was no point in telling an adult what had happened, because nobody's gonna believe you. Now, as an adult, even if a 16-year-old is crying wolf, I at least pretend like I'm believing them, because I can't put somebody through what I've been through. What if they are telling the truth and I just don't know it? I remember when DJ would get this crazy look on his face. You know how sometimes people say they see the devil in their eyes or an evil look? This man, it was his whole face would just have this air about it that it was all evil. But it was more than evil, it was mean. And one time when he took his first trip down around South America, he came back with this bullwhip that had a cat o' nine tails on the end of it. And he put it on the wall. One day, he got this bright idea to take it after me. My parents had used everything to leave welts on my back. Wire coat hangers, electrical cords, whips, anything they could get their hands on. Their favorite was this little 1x6 piece of wood. At first, it just looked like an ordinary paddle. But then they carved my name in it. And the name was Finger Whip. So, when it hit you, it would hurt worse. Some parents who are abusive like to put holes in their paddle because it hurt worse. I was the oldest child, so everything was my fault. I had caused everything in their minds. They would say that if my brothers did something wrong, I taught it to them. They had to have learned it somewhere. Never mind that they watched TV or they had friends at school. And if they hadn't learned it from me, it was my job to make sure they didn't do it. I had a huge job. There were days when I had to make the breakfast, the lunch, and the dinner for all three of us. 4 when Elizabeth came along. I remember one day, Mom had gone somewhere. DJ was at work. And she left us kids at home. I mean, this is something that happened quite often. And most of our neighbors did the same thing. They left their kids at home alone a lot. If there was a kid that was 6 years or older, it wasn't no big thing. But then back then you didn't have a whole lot of problems that anybody knew about. I mean, we did, but I mean, the problems were there, but they weren't apparent. Nobody saw them, so they didn't exist, you know? Out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Elizabeth, Ted, and Tom had gone outside to
Star Trek DT 52.1
to play with the dogs, and I decided I wanted to make an elderberry pie. I couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but I'd been learning to cook since I was 6. By the way, my mom's idea of teaching a child to cook was to hand you the Joy of Cooking cookbook and saying, "Here, read it." Of course, Mom wasn't that great a cook. The only thing she managed to make pretty good was biscuits. I've even known her to burn coffee and toast. And I can honestly say, I have never burned coffee. Burned toast once or twice, but never coffee. Funny thing was, biscuits were the only thing I ever messed up. Put them in the oven, forget about them, and 2 hours later they're burnt to a crisp. I remember bullet burying a dozen biscuits I had made for a week, digging them up and then burying them again. That was funny. You know you burned your biscuits pretty bad when a dog buries them twice. Well, my brothers came in and they saw the flour sack and they were feeling pretty silly. And so they decided to sling it all over the kitchen. And that was about the time the Department of Social Services decided to show up for the first time at our house. Bullet would not let them out of the car, and I was thankful for that. Tried to tell her that Bullet wouldn't hurt her, but she didn't believe it. I cleaned up the kitchen as best I could. Mom came home, found some flour in a corner that I'd missed, and asked what happened, and I told her. And I got a lecture. And I also told her what happened with the caseworker, and apparently she was thankful enough. She didn't want to hurt me.